All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Let's first off thank you all for attending today's webinar titled Learn About New SecureAuth IdP 9.3 Enhancements. I'm Damon Tepe, Director of Product Marketing here at SecureAuth, and I'll be joined today by Jeff Hickman, our super awesome Director of Sales Engineering. The title kind of says it all, and we're excited to show you these new enhancements, but before we get into that, let's get into some housekeeping items first. Next slide. So all attendee audio lines are muted. This is for everyone's listening pleasure. You can submit questions via the Q&A panel at any time throughout the session. It's located in the right-hand side of your console. I think it's towards the bottom. And I encourage you to do so when questions arise. So this kind of ensures that you don't forget by the end when we do the Q&A session. Those submitted questions will be answered during that Q&A session at the end of the presentation. If we run out of time, we'll follow up with you directly. We have roughly, 40 minutes or so of content, and then we'll follow it up with a, 10 or 15-minute Q&A session, depending on how long it goes. Slides and a recording of this session will be sent to you later this or next week, so there's no need to ask that question during the Q&A. And if you have questions related to this webinar or any others, you can always contact us at webinars@secureauth.com. So let's move on, take a quick look at the agenda. So these are kind of the topic areas we plan to review: new administrative improvements of IdP 9.3, how they work, what benefit they provide. We'll do some comparison demos where we'll take a look at the old administrative screens and the new ones. We'll next talk about behavior analysis powered by machine learning. Same kind of thing. We'll talk about how it works, why it's important, talk about use cases and summary. We'll do a little wrap-up and summary at the end, and then we'll jump into our questions. So we have multiple demonstrations today as well. So the flow will be kind of me talking about how a new enhancement works and why it's important. Jeff will show you the solution and related screens. So if we can go to the next slide. So let's just dig into the administrative enhancements in IdP 9.3. And so the first key feature is a new cloud architecture. SecureAuth IdP Administrative Console has been upgraded to this new cloud-based architecture. IdP 9.3 boasts an improved layout and more intuitive design. The dashboard is editable, and we're continually building dashboard widgets that you can display on the homepage. Maybe it's number of failed authentication attempts or successful authentication attempts. In the future, though, you will be able to configure your own dashboard widgets, and we're looking into launching a community so all customers can share and reuse these customized widgets. But that's a little bit of the futures. So you can see a difference a bit on the right-hand side of the screen. The top screenshot is the new dashboard welcome screen, and the bottom one is the previous screen. And this dashboard is hosted by SecureAuth in Amazon Web Services. And the benefit to you, our customers, beyond an improved layout, home pages can be easily updated without having to upgrade or install anything. You can make changes once and have them available everywhere. You can see how the screen has been simplified and maybe decluttered, easier to find things, less complicated to use. The goal here is to reduce administrative time and effort so you realize a faster time to value. So Jeff, go ahead and take it away with a brief little demo.
Awesome. Thank you, Damon. So what we're going to do here is we're going to jump over to an IdP box using version of SecureAuth 9.2. This appliance here is going to allow us to kind of just see what we've all been used to if you currently are SecureAuth customers. This is our home page. It is quite cluttered. It does show you all these objects that we call realms currently. I'm very happy to say that realm terminology is actually going away, that we're moving to a more reusable object architecture. And what this might be familiar to you with is that it's a lot of complication, a lot of kind of difficulty when it comes to setting things up. There's multiple tabs, there's a lot of fields, there's things that have been around in the product for a while that were never really reevaluated and revisited. By contrast, the new user experience here is going to be a little bit different, where we can actually see that we have a really, really simple landing screen here. This home screen is our place to announce things to you as a customer, as well as you're going to be able to have different widgets and information appearing on this screen. But it's a way that you can see how do we use these new features in the data store and get some tips and helps and things along those lines. So as you explore through here and as we continue to go through this webinar here, we'll dive into each of these different areas where data store management is, as well as the application manager. We'll dive into each of those, and I'm sure you'll have a bunch of questions that come out of that, but please be patient with us as we'll go into each one of these and explain what that means for you.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. Yep. Mm-hmm. The second key administrative feature, as Jeff kind of alluded to in 9.3, is this reusable directory integration objects. So prior to SecureAuth IdP 9.3, system administrators were required to recreate directory integrations every time they create or deploy a new application or system. So some of you have a lot of applications, varying different data stores today, where updating them means going to each app individually and making directory changes. By introducing reusable directory integration objects, administrators save time by building the integration once and reusing it multiple times. The time to create the object is like less than a minute, maybe it's 2 minutes, and it can be copied and modified in even less time. And so this reusable approach saves time. And once again, administrators make change and save it, they're automatically changed everywhere. So the benefits, again, are the reduced time and people required and speeding up that kind of time to value for IDP. So with that, I think, Jeff, you get back into showing them data stores.
Perfect. Yep. So what we're going to do here is we're actually going to start, let's start with the old experience and just talk about that a little bit. Many of you may be familiar with the data tab and the existing experience here that has quite a bit of information on it. And it's just one big, long page where you have to kind of know what you're doing a little bit to fill in here. With the new experience, we've kind of actually improved that quite a bit to make it more wizard-driven. So if I come to my user data stores here and I choose to add a data store, I'm going to be asked some simple questions right off the bat. First, I'm going to be asked for a name. And I'm going to say here that this is a test active directory that we're going to set up here. And I'll be allowed to choose my directory type. And once I've done that, it will present me with a bunch more wizard options that I can flow through and understand. It's quite straightforward. There's things like membership validation or being just used for profile. I'm able to come in here and put in this case, my IP address to generate my connection string. In fact, I can actually come in here and make a custom directory string if I need to. So I can come in here and say something like, oh, even though I'm using an IP address, I actually want to have it pointed to this specific domain in my environment. I'll provide it with a service account. I'll provide it with a password for my service account. I'll be able to set what I want to use as my search filter or the way that I authenticate users, whether it's SAM account name or user principal name. I'll also be able to go into an advanced mode and set my own search filter. So if I want to allow things like email address and SAM account name and user principal name as all possible ways to identify my users, I can do so. This encryption attribute here is something that we use to encrypt sensitive information in your data store when we save that information. So I'll just come in here and fill out, a random attribute. It doesn't really matter what it is. It should follow maybe with what you do with your passwords, that complexity. But it's only for you, and it's stored in the secure place on your local appliance. Once I have this information here, you'll see the continue button will become available. I'll click on that, and it's going to take me to my properties. Many of you may know that SecureAuth reads properties out of your existing data store, whether that's SQL or Active Directory or what have you. This is where you can map up things for like phone numbers or email addresses that SecureAuth can use to validate users, or additionally things like our push notification tokens or oath tokens where you can add those and easily manage them here. Once I've done all that and I've saved my data store, you'll now see that it's listed under a list of data store objects here. And as that pops up, you'll get some very basic information, the name and the source, but you'll have some actions over here where you can view a summary that shows you all of your connection information. You can also come back in here and click on them and edit that information at any time. Additionally, you'll also be able to edit the properties by viewing each property, and you can go in and edit a single property. Now, the nice part about this, like Damon said, and we'll see here very shortly, is that you'll be able to tie this same directory to multiple applications as you deploy them. So what that means is that you're only making one change versus in our old user experience, each time that you want to make a change, you would have to go to each of these realms here and make a change for every data store, or you have to do the checkbox for every single one that you want to apply them to. It really decreases the amount of time that's required for you guys as administrators of the systems to be able to deploy applications, manage data stores, and really get back to your day-to-day lives rather than having to manage SecureAuth. One last little bit here, if you ever did want to go back, you can also click the classic experience here, and you'll be dropped right into the old user experience here. As you see, when we go through and add an application in a little bit here, we'll actually see it create all the records for that as we go through it. And we'll also look at how we can still set up our adaptive authentication, our MFA, and workflows through that process as well. With that, I'll toss it back over to Damon.
Thank you, Jeff. Next slide. There we go. So the final key administrative feature in IDP 9.3 is the new application onboarding and template library. So in IDP 9.3, the application onboarding experience has been streamlined and condensed with the creation of a library of application templates. Again, reducing overhead, speeding time to value. So to improve and accelerate the process of deploying multi-factor or adaptive authentication, single sign-on, self-service tools to various corporate applications, we've improved the administrative experience by auto-populating various fields and creating a library of reusable application templates. So in the past, each application had to be configured separately. Now much of the work is already done for you. Less confusion, faster time to deployment, and templates can be updated at any time, and that, again, that change spreads automatically throughout the environment. And so I think that's a great segue back into Jeff. You alluded to talking to them about an application template. Let's show them.
Absolutely. So we're going to dive in here, and we've already created our data store, so we can see that that record exists. And now I've been tasked by my management to add Salesforce into SecureAuth. Previously, a lot of you may have known that you would go out to SecureAuth's documentation website, which is a great resource which shows you how to set up different applications, both on the SecureAuth side of the house as well on that application as well. But that wasn't good enough. And we really felt that there was a need to have a way to make this easier for you, especially with well-known configuration objects. So one of those objects that we decided to implement was things that are templates. These templates are approved by SecureAuth. They've been tested to work inside of our environment. And so you simply click Add an Application, and you'll see a big list of different applications that SecureAuth can work with, and we have templates for out of the box. This application list is growing day by day. There's actually a number of ways that we grow this. One, it's our integration team internally working with these applications, and it's also customers who are providing us with, hey, you guys currently work with this. Can you make it into a template for me? And we'll add it as a template library. Here in the near future, we'll also be opening up a way for all of our customers to contribute templates and share templates among each other as needed as well. So for Salesforce here, I'm going to search for it, which is a nice search feature that I can narrow down exactly what I'm looking for. I'm going to select the application. Here on this page, I can give it a new name if I don't want it to say Salesforce. I can give it a description that's only for the administrators so they have a way to reference it. I can even upload a new logo if I don't want to use the default one that we provide. And then I'll be able to select my data store here. So I know I named it Test Active Directory, so I start typing. It provides me with what I have here. I select that. And I'm able to set group membership as well. If I want to restrict this to certain groups or if I want to allow everyone, I can do that here. Once I've selected those defaults, I'll hit Continue, and then it's going to bring me on to the next step here for integrating with Salesforce. One of the nice parts here you'll notice is that it's all labeled for Salesforce for the specific things. We even have tooltips built into the system here to tell you where to go in Salesforce to look for these specific things. So that all you're doing is you're simply coming through here and you're mapping up different properties for that application. And bear with me here for a moment where I just log in and I'm going to Just create a record here. You can do things like select the valid hours for SAML. You could tell it whether it needs to sign the message and what certificate is being used. So you can load that in quite simply here. You can tell it using what signing algorithm to be used, and you can additionally add SAML attributes by simply clicking the Add SAML Attribute button and filling them out here. Once you have all of your preferences done, you're going to click Add Application. What's going to happen in the background is that this template is actually being populated and created against your SecureAuth instance. It's going to take all the data out of the template, the static stuff that we've preset for you, as well as the dynamic fields that you've added, and we're going to push those all over into your appliance. And it's going to give you this summary page. This is actually an information page here that allows you to take information out of the IDP and connect it up to Salesforce. In fact, one of the nice features here is being able to download the metadata dynamically, so that if your application, such as Salesforce, supports importing metadata from an IDP, you can simply click Import Metadata. Once you've done that and you've configured your SP here, you can click and continue on to a summary where it shows you everything about that application. And if you need to go in and make changes because maybe you messed something up, or you need to get the metadata again, or you need to add a new certificate, you can do that all from this screen. I also mentioned that we have a way to get to workflow management, and two-factor and adaptive authentication. You'll see this on a summary by application. What this means is this allows us to control each application independently still for its authentication, so they can each have their own workflows, adaptive auth, and two-factor methodology. Today, if I click on adaptive authentication, you'll notice it does take me back to the classic experience, but here in the near future, actually, outside of our major releases, we'll be moving these pieces up into the new interface. This allows us to rapidly deploy out new features in that administrative interface without you having to actually do a SecureAuth software update. But you'll always have this classic experience that you can fall back to. So if you're used to managing it that way, you can use that, or you can always go into the new experience and manage from there. When I come back to my application manager, you'll see that I have Salesforce listed here, and it would provide me with just some basic details, and I can always come in and edit that as needed. With that, Damon, I'll toss it back over to you.
Thanks, Jeff. Next slide. Okay, so these following are kind of noteworthy feature enhancements before we get into the topic of user behavior analysis. So I'm not going to show anything in this section. I'm simply going to walk through what each of these are and kind of what's the benefit. So we now support the Pixie standard. It's a technique to secure communications when using the OAuth protocol. I think the thing to remember here is that it helps prevent man-in-the-middle attacks or interception of authentication information between users and applications, and of course the fact that we support it. Next is the inline initialization enhancement. And so that sounds like some complicated stuff, but it's not really. It's kind of best to use an example to describe this one. So let's say a user wants to use SMS or text, for example, for their authentication one-time passcode, but they don't have the phone number field populated in their directory profile. So instead of simply not allowing that type of multi-factor authentication method, they can now be redirected to an IDP self-service page for updating the profile. User goes through a brief authentication to ensure the phone belongs legitimately to them, and they're granted access. The next time they choose or go to log in, everything works as intended. So they'll get that SMS or text-based one-time passcode. So the real value here lies in not disrupting the authentication flow and providing users a secure and automated way to update their profile themselves while still gaining access without administrator or help desk involvement. The next thing is the ability to customize the PIN length. So whether it's 4 or 6 or 10 characters used to access our authentication app and or desktop passcode application, it just provides added security to ensure the phone or computer hasn't been stolen or quote unquote borrowed. Our legitimate user is the only one who knows the PIN. So if the device is stolen, it's much harder to use in a fraudulent authentication. So why allow longer PINs? Anyone has a 1 in 10,000 chance of guessing a 4-digit PIN. That jumps to 1 in multiple billions with a 10-digit one. So hopefully that kind of shows the difference. Our next enhancement is supporting identity management features like self-service password reset and create user when a customer wants to use an e-directory. I think prior to this release, you simply could not do these type of actions, so now you can. And our last kind of new feature that's worth explaining here is the ability to invert a user risk score that we could potentially get from a different third party. So some third parties provide a risk score where 1 equals high, 2 equals medium, 3 equals low risk. Others provide 1 as low risk, 2 as medium, 3 as high. I think the thing I want you to take away from this is we can now switch that depending on however that third party delivers their risk score. So it no longer matters. And that kind of concludes the IDP administrative enhancements part of the webinar. If you have any questions, again, I just encourage you to go ahead and put those in the chat box. Now I'd like to kind of switch gears a bit from the administrative simplification and use features and talk about risk evaluation and behavior analysis, which kind of give clues to an attacker presence. If we can go to the next slide. So the first thing we want to do, and this is, behavior analysis done by machine learning. So I thought it was wise to, let's get a definition of machine learning. Machine learning is the science of getting computers to learn and act like humans do and improve their learning over time in an autonomous fashion by feeding them data and information in the form of observations and real-world interactions. So while it's not quite Terminator and the ability for computers to think for themselves, it's kind of a step in that direction. So keep in mind, machine learning was developed to analyze data sets too large for humans to grasp. Only computers and maybe Sheldon Cooper can ingest these huge volumes of data, make sense of it, develop patterns from it. And this will make a bit more sense, I think, as we go along and I describe this. So let's move on to why behavior analysis via machine learning is important. So, behavior analysis via machine learning's importance grows as cyber attackers continue to get past organizational defenses. You're probably familiar with all or some of these statistics, but they tell a story. What organizations are doing today is not working, and additional security is needed if you want to better ensure protection against identity-related breaches. So, collectively, we spent nearly $100 billion on security last year globally, but in that same time period, breaches rose some 44%. And they rose 40% the previous year. So the spend really isn't having the desired effect. 81% of breaches involve stolen or weak credentials. That kind of points to multi-factor authentication maybe only being partially deployed, maybe these systems, not those, as well as attackers being able to bypass many popular multi-factor authentication methods. So the lesson here, I think, is cover all your systems minimally with multi-factor authentication and supplement it with multiple risk checks to ensure an attacker can't bypass and blend in with everyday users. Behavior analysis is going to be one of those risk checks. So in a survey we conducted last year, 99% of those survey participants told us they believe two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication is all they need to protect access and keep attackers at bay. And unfortunately, this simply is no longer true. Attackers have used many different methods to circumvent multi-factor authentication, whether it's real-time phishing, text and voice call interception, malware on the device, SIM swap fraud, where attackers take over a victim's phone account. And as more time passes, attackers will find more ways around various different multi-factor authentication methods. And if an attacker gets in and steals data, the average cost to the breached organization in the United States is now $7.9 million and rising. So to put that in perspective, last year, maybe a little before last year, it was much closer to $4 million. So it's almost doubled. And lastly, many organizations are concerned about the user's experience during authentication and removing as many disruptions as possible. So why behavior analysis via machine learning? It complements multi-factor authentication and can find attackers and insider threats that may be able to bypass an organization's present access security. So it helps reduce that 44% increase in breaches last year. Behavior analysis can prevent attackers from traversing multiple systems with compromised credentials because we're now monitoring behavior and application access frequency. Behavior analysis can fill the protection gaps that multi-factor authentication leaves behind. And this is pretty much true of all adaptive authentication risk checks. And it can be a critical component to preventing a breach and saving an organization, millions in those breach aftermath costs. And lastly, behavior analysis can improve the user experience for your users by reducing the number of daily multi-factor authentication disruptions. Good, normal behavior could result in no multi-factor authentication step being required. With that said, let's take a quick look at how behavior analysis via machine learning works. So next slide, please. So the next two slides will actually kind of explain how it works. This one will be a little bit higher level, then we'll dig into kind of an example. So the first step in how machine learning analyzes user behavior is the intake of data. Each company has a SecureAuth provided specific cloud tenant that houses all that user data from authentication events. The next step is profile creation. So a user's profile is created by looking at various fields from authentication logs and establishing patterns. These patterns are considered normal behavior for that particular user. Examples could be, John typically logs in from 7 to 9 a.m. every weekday, logs out between 4 and 6 p.m. His location 95% of the time is a home office in Columbus, Ohio, and he rarely logs in over weekends. So the next step is risk analysis. So during login, the user is analyzed via the user risk policy and is given a score based on any profile anomalies. So in simple terms, we compare present authentication behavior to past normal behavior from the profile and see what differs. How much it differs is reflected in the score. So you, the buyer, get to set the score sensitivity. And the last thing is response. So IDP responds to the level of risk based on where the user score lands in the configured thresholds. Those responses can be allow user access without a multi-factor authentication step, allow user access with a successful MFA step, force a secure password reset, redirect to some safe zone, maybe it's a honeypot of some sort, or we can just deny access altogether. So let's dig a little deeper, provide maybe an example. I think it'll help crystallize this. We can go to the next slide, please. So SecureAuth behavior analysis has already established a baseline of normal behavior based on the 600 plus million authentications we see a year before a purchase is even made. So during this intake of data step, we're really refining that baseline and making it a little bit more specific to an individual user. And again, we're looking at time of day and week, IP address used, location, login success, login failure, and specific system activity. So it's worth noting that the more authentication events reviewed, the more accurate this profile becomes. So it becomes more accurate the longer it's deployed or used. So during the profile creation step, similar to what I mentioned before, we identify what normal is, right? Logs in Monday through Friday between 7 and 9, logs out Monday through Friday between 4 and 6, rarely logs in on weekends. IP is normally within corp IP ranges. This user works at the corporate offices, rarely authenticates from a location other than those corp offices. Login success is 98%. Every once in a while, 2%, maybe they fat finger something, they actually get a failure. And although this person has access rights, they rarely access sensitive financial and customer data. Maybe it's once or twice a year. So during the risk analysis step, we check the normal against the present. And in this particular instance, our user logged in at 3 a.m., logs out at 5 on a Sunday. The IP is not a regular corp-owned one. Location's not normal, right? We're now looking at New York versus Ohio, for example. Multiple failed attempts before we've had success, and they were accessing the financial and customer data systems. So there's obviously some risk here because most behavior checks are showing some abnormalities. So during the response step, we determine what the next steps are. We can allow access without that multi-factor authentication step, deny access, force a password reset, multiple different options here. I think it's important to understand that it's unlikely that you would rely on just behavior analysis alone. More likely, you deploy other SecureAuth adaptive authentication risk checks to help determine what response action we should take. So while the example I just used seems to point to malicious activity, all actions just could be odd circumstances, actually be a legitimate user versus some attacker. So based on behavior analysis results alone, we may just require a successful multi-factor authentication step before granting access. But if other risk checks showed like the IP was from an anonymous proxy, or we got a hit on our threat sheet of malicious IPs, or we didn't recognize the device, we would likely recommend forcing a password reset or denying access altogether. So hopefully through this example and the past couple slides, you can kind of see the power of this behavior analysis via machine learning and the ability to detect abnormal behavior that could be an indication of a cyber attacker or even a hard-to-detect insider threat. So we can go to the next slide, please. So I just want to spend a little time talking about varying use cases that behavior analysis can be used to unmask attackers. The first is probably most obvious and similar to the examples I've used so far. We're pretty much talking about everyday users and the attackers trying to imposter them in various ways. But what about attackers who have created their own profile, are legitimately credentialed, so they created their own username and passwords, are enrolled in the company's multi-factor authentication program? Again, by looking at behavior, we can begin to see oddities. Why accessing rare systems at odd days and times? We would see IP address fluctuations, odd locations, odd times, unusual number of failed login attempts. These are all clues to uncovering very hard to find attackers deeply entrenched, potentially in systems prior to our arrival. So similar to the above challenge of finding those kinds of attackers that are kind of already in and created their own credentials, very similar to kind of insider threats. Those would be legitimate users willing to steal or sell organizational data. Very difficult to find these malicious individuals because everything about them screams no risk. We recognize their computer, the phone, IP, location, account type, etc. They can pass multi-factor authentication because they're real employees, partners, or customers. But through behavior, we can determine if their actions show or hint at bad intent. So why accessing sensitive systems today when they rarely do? Why working late the past couple of days when they haven't worked past 6 p.m. in 2 years? Without these clues, security teams wouldn't easily know to maybe put a more watchful eye on a particular user over the next couple of weeks. So why is behavior analysis from SecureAuth better than from some other vendor? First off, SecureAuth provides a baseline of behavior out of the box. Most other vendors require some period of time to create the baseline. So again, faster time to value. The second point is you can only analyze data you have. So machine learning analysis is only as good as the inputs you put into it. We at SecureAuth collect more data from our adaptive authentication risk checks than any other vendor. And so better inputs equals better outputs. Today, we're starting with a small set of behavior data for machine learning to analyze. We will expand to analyze other data we collect once we better understand how users behave in general. So in the near future, we can accelerate data analysis for customers that other vendors simply cannot because they don't collect the data. It's also worth mentioning behavior analysis is only one of many adaptive authentication risk checks we do. Analyzing behavior along with device and location, IP address, is why SecureAuth provides the industry's best identity protection and smoothest user experience. So let's now take a brief look at everyday use of behavior analysis via machine learning. And so this is kind of the last slide before we do a little demonstration. Behavior analysis is new to the authentication space, but has been in use for 2-3 years in various capacities, and you've undoubtedly been exposed to it, but you probably didn't know it. So credit card fraud prevention. You may remember a couple of years ago, maybe you were traveling for business, maybe it was a vacation, and your card may have been declined for a large purchase. Or maybe you had a representative from the credit card company call you to verify if you were actually making that purchase. This happened because the credit card providers were building your behavior or purchase profile. Now when you attempt to make similar purchases from new or different locations, it's viewed as normal for you. Another example is mobile check deposits. So machine learning is used to decipher handwritten parts of your check so it gets properly deposited. Behavior analysis via machine learning is used to help make credit decisions, helping or hurting your application for a loan or a credit card, poring over your credit history, your buying patterns, your earning patterns. Facebook even uses machine learning to recognize faces and photos that you upload and can make suggestions on which friends to tag in which photos. Varying social media outlets continue this behavior analysis and machine learning to understand the context of slang, such that they can suggest emojis to convey your message more quickly and visually. My last example is Amazon. Amazon uses behavior analysis to understand individual buying behavior and patterns so they can make highly relevant suggestions for other goods. You've probably seen the, quote, your recently viewed items and featured recommendations, end of quote, at the bottom of Amazon searches for goods. This is machine learning generated. So while this technology is not new, it's new to the authentication and access management space, and that's true for any vendor offering. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Jeff and have him walk through a quick demonstration.
Thank you, Damon. So one of the largest challenges with doing behavior analytics and specifically with demos is that our behavior as people who do demos becomes normal very quickly. As Damon illustrated so eloquently that as I, as a user, log in, it knows my pattern. A couple important things that I just wanted to touch on to kind of put that in the right frame of reference. SecureAuth for a while now, for more than 8 months, has been analyzing data from customers who have elected to submit that data to us. That data is completely anonymous to us. We don't know who the actual users are. In fact, if you're using this platform, we don't know in our cloud instance of our machine learning who your users are at all. We just identify them through a unique one-way hash. But based off that information that we've collected, we've been able to generate what's called a baseline or a beginning model in the machine learning world. And that model is what we're starting off with. So as I've used this system, as I've touched all the different pieces of it, my behavior now deviates pretty drastically from that model. But the nice part is that it's my behavior. And so because it understands that, it's now going to allow me to access it using my standard authentication rules. So that as long as I'm coming from the corporate network and I'm using a device that I know, the behavior, the risk that's going to return back to me is pretty low because it knows my typical behavior throughout the day. So let's take a look a little bit in IDP of how you set that up and what you get to control from the side of how that affects your users. I apologize as I log back in here. But what we'll take a look at here is we're going to look at the adaptive authentication rule set and specifically the one that's called user risk. And what you'll notice is that there are two pieces there. There's a user risk piece and an analytics risk. Both of them work together in conjunction with this platform. And what you get to set as an administrator of the system is what your thresholds are. We obviously baseline it based off of our experience of these are your default thresholds. So this kind of tells you where they are. Based off of what we expect off of a normal profile or a first-time user coming in. But let's say, for example, as you begin to use the platform, you notice that, hey, look, we're getting low risk probably 99% of the time. Because the low risk on the user risk is set to 49, we want to tighten that down a little bit for specific sensitive applications. The nice part about our platform is it allows you to control which application responds how to each risk score. So for example, if I have a financial application, I want any deviation from normal to be caught. So I could lower, just by clicking edit here, I can actually lower my low threshold down to 17%. and maybe my medium and our high threshold comes down to 70%. So it allows you to choose how you respond to that risk score. So talking about that risk score a little bit, well, what does that look like? What I have here is a bit of log information for you out of the risk score analysis. And this is exactly the type of stuff that we're looking for. And I apologize, there's some header information here. I want to extract it out, but I only had it as an image off my machine here. But this is the type of information that we look at. We say, hey, look, there's a threat here that's saying it's potentially compromised. And the reason why is it was very unusual that, and we can see here that this is that hashed identity who we don't really know who they are. They failed login attempts when trying to access, at this particular case, SecureAuth 4, or this could say Salesforce or Workday, however you have your system set up. And they've only had one day with failed login attempts before, meaning that in the past, they've only failed logins usually like once a day, right? Today, they failed it multiple times. Because of that, we bumped their risk score to 24 off of a 0. Now, that still hits my low threshold because, you know what, people make mistakes with passwords when they're logging them in, and we're looking at the specific password event, and so we kind of account for that. If you maybe failed 7 or 8 password attempts, it would bump it up, but because it was only failed a couple, it's not going to bump it up to ask for second factor, and it's going to keep that risk threshold low. The nice part about this is that it combines upon itself throughout the day. So let's say, for example, this first access the user has, they failed with some logins and they finally get in. Their risk score is sitting at that 24, but then they immediately go to click on the financial tile that they have inside of the secure portal, let's say, or they immediately go over to maybe Dynamics CRM or some other financial portal that's being used, and that's outside their behavior. And now adds that to their existing risk score. So while it was a 24 before and it was low, it's now going to bump that up and maybe push them into the threshold of around 50 or 60% because they're doing something so far out of their normal patterns of access. And because of that, when they go to access that financial system, it's going to say, hey, let's do another MFA step here. Let's do something else to verify that you are who you say you are. Or you know what, let's block it because you've actually hit my high threshold, which was set to 70. And because you hit that, I'm no longer allow you to go forward. So the nice part about this is rather than just being a pure policy engine, right? Rather than just being a static, you either pass or fail, it begins to learn with the system. It begins to understand how these users normally behave. So if I was to log into this right now and walk through this profile with you, I wouldn't be challenged because it knows how I behave on a day-to-day basis. Now, if I was to go in and I was to reset my score, it may challenge me, but it may also challenge me because I've reset my device fingerprint and I've reset my geolocation information as well. These are all kind of tied together to analyze and understand how a user logs in. That's the power and advantage of the SecureAuth adaptive authentication layering. And with that, I'll hand that back over to you, Damon.
Thank you. So we're kind of nearing the end of today's presentation. Got a couple more slides if we can advance. I'm going to try and pick up the pace so we've got a bit more time for questions. So next slide, please.
Do you see it there? It should be on the wrap-up slide.
Yeah. Can we go to the next one?
Yep. Sorry. Yep.
No worries. So behavioral analysis is only one layer of our adaptive authentication stack, right, with many others listed, on the right-hand side of the slide. And the more layers, the more protected an organization is. So if we think of each of these as, risk checks, including behavior analysis as nets meant to capture attackers, but allow legitimate users through, if you don't cast a trap or a net, you will not find a clue or a characteristic signaling attacker presence. So all these risk checks kind of work together to elevate protection and provide a great user experience. And they're all meant to improve on multi-factor authentication alone. So just like building security may have multiple layers of security, you have a fence, you got an armed guard, you got locks on the doors, you have cameras watching everything. The more layers you have of protection, the harder it is for an attacker to get past them. And makes you more secure, from that potentially bad access. So again, SecureAuth offers more risk analysis than any other vendor, and this adaptive authentication or risk-based authentication is kind of like buying insurance. You hope you don't really need it, but you're sure glad when you really do. Next slide, please. So I find it interesting that Gartner offered up this prediction that by 2022, roughly 30% of enterprises will use a risk-based approach to vulnerability management and will suffer 80% less breaches. So why should you consider context and risk factors to help secure access to your systems? Passwords are no longer a secret, and they provide little protection from unauthorized use. From reusing a familiar password to multiple reusing their password from multiple systems to the billions, that is a B, of credentials available on the dark web, the password really isn't effective anymore. Most attackers are getting, or a lot of attackers can get past two-factor authentication. I told you a bunch of different, whether it's phishing, whether it's interception, malware, phone fraud. Again, this is only increasing. But if we think about that adaptive layers as more kind of like a bulletproof vest, right? And bulletproof vests are made up of multiple laminate fibers, right? A bullet can go through one of those fibers, but if I layer like 7 of them together, bullet can't get through. So you may be wondering why SecureAuth looks at so many context and risk factors. The idea here is that if you don't look, you're not going to find. So each check is again, that net meant to capture a bad guy. The more you know about those accessing your systems, the more trust you gain or lose. You can better control where and when authentication disruptions are needed or not. And the more you know, the better access decisions you can make. Take that insider threat example I touched on previously. They're very difficult to discover. If you only use passwords and 2FA, it's rare you're ever going to uncover them. But by analyzing multiple other factors, you get a much cleaner picture. Next slide, please. Hey, Jeff, there you go, thank you. I really just wanted to kind of touch on the packages and show where certain items fall. The administrative enhancements discussed in the first part of the presentation are available for everyone, so it's free for current customers, no additional cost to upgrade. The new behavioral analysis via machine learning capability is in the prevent package, and that's shown in orange on the slide. I thought it was interesting to compare kind of Okta and Duo, who published their pricing on their website. So, to get Okta's adaptive multi-factor authentication, it costs $6 a user per month, but it doesn't have network carrier or phone type blocking or porting status. They have no behavior analysis, no malicious IP blocking, so they're essentially charging, more and providing less than we are. Duo's in a very similar boat, right? They start their adaptive capabilities at $6 per user per month, go up to $9 per user per month, and they don't have same things, network carrier, phone blocking, porting status, no behavior analysis via machine learning, no malicious IP blocking. So it's kind of the same thing. And then if we can just move on to the last slide before we hit questions. I just wanted to touch on, this is available and has been available since January 21st. If you want the behavior analysis via machine learning, it is part of the prevent package. That prevent package costs $5 per user per month. Again, the administrative enhancements are free for existing customers. And then I just wanted to touch on, because I get this question a lot, why prevent over the protect package? And so the prevent package is our highest capability offering, and the biggest difference is in the protect package is it has less risk checks. So you get more risk checks with the prevent package, you get slightly less with the protect package. And I've kind of hinted at this throughout, but our prevent package has more risk checks, and they tend to be risk checks and things that most other vendors don't do. And again, the more nets you cast, the greater chance you're going to catch something. So if you don't check, you're not going to find. It only takes one attacker to get in, find what they want, extract it. Our prevent package has risk checks no one else does. All of the phone fraud stuff, whether it's blocking by phone carrier, blocking by phone type, or blocking by porting status, no one else does that. And they all provide phone-based multi-factor authentication. Very few vendors actually have a large continually updated threat feed of malicious IPs to bounce your user IPs or the ones requesting access against. And we can even consume a risk score from any third-party product you may already own. I don't know of any other vendor that enables you to do that. So keep in mind, the more risk checks you do, the greater chance of catching an attacker, but also establishing trust around that particular user. And when we trust that user and who they claim to be, we can improve the user experience by securely skipping multi-factor authentication disruptions. So no one offers the identity security protection we can. Even if you're not ready for it today, the path is there for you in the future. So if we go to the last slide, or we can leave it here, it doesn't matter. This kind of concludes today's presentation. Thank you for staying to the end. We'll now open up the lines for questions. Please put your questions in that Q&A box in the bottom right-hand side of your console, and we'll address them in the order they come in. Thanks again for your participation on today's call. So we have one question, and Jeff, I'll read it. You can answer. It says, you mentioned cloud, but what about on-prem appliances? Maybe we just need to explain how the cloud administrative console works with the on-prem appliance.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think we kind of probably glazed over that a little bit, so let's drill down into it. When we mention cloud, that's something that SecureAuth has kind of had for years at the back end. It's where our threat service has sat. It's where this machine learning part that we talked about today is sitting now as well. But basically, this was a way for us to deliver an admin experience that we were able to update outside the normal sequence of SecureAuth updates. This allows us to add features or refine things based on your improvements. So when we say cloud, what actually happens is that your IDP on-premise, it just pulls the resources down from the cloud locally. So it's actually pulling them down into your system to be used there locally rather than having to, rather than actually living in the cloud. So if you're on-premise, what will happen is that interface comes down, you're actually using it technically locally on your actual appliance, and then any of the handling, any of the stuff that we have to do all translates and goes to your local IDP. None of your sensitive data, none of your passwords for data stores, none of your configuration details that are unique or potentially sensitive are saved in our cloud system. They're all saved locally still inside of your IDP. The reason I think the underlying question of that's going to come out of this is the reason that we're doing this is so that we can, as we move forward, offer a more comprehensive SaaS-based solution to customers as well as on-premise, so that you can pick and choose easier than kind of having to have separate instances. It becomes universal for you, and it just becomes a agnostic deployment method of wherever you want to place it. This allows us to constantly improve and enhance features without actually having to take you down. Obviously, any features that change functionality that aren't purely administrative user experience, you're notified of those changes before they are applied. You can opt out of them, and we will continue to be deployment mode agnostic, meaning on-premise, cloud, or hybrid of the two. That will continue well into our future.
And that's all I have for questions. So again, I encourage those of you that have remained, if you have a question, now's the time to ask it. Maybe we just did such a great job that we answered all the questions. But I would imagine there's somebody out there who still has a question. So we'll wait a couple more seconds here, see if another question comes in. I'm going to take that as there are no more questions. So once again, thank you all for attending today. Thank you for being a SecureAuth customer.
Oh, we have one more here. Yep, this is from Sharon. Does the sync service still work the same from load balancers on two servers? Yes, that continues to work, but it's going to become redundant here in the near future. It's actually, the plan is to no longer have that sync service because the way the UX is built with reusable objects, it will sync to all of your IDPs. In fact, if you choose to upgrade today to 9.3, we actually handle some of that on the back end for you now. You'll notice if you go to 9.3, you're going to be asked how you want to tag an appliance, meaning you can tag an appliance as production, dev, test, data center 1, data center 2, data center New York, however you want to tag it, and that will allow us to logically group those appliances together and make sure that the configurations you're making in the new admin interface actually map between all those that are tagged alike.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. I'm just waiting a couple more seconds to see if another one pops in. Because, of course, I will thank everybody for attending, and we'll get another question. Yeah, okay. Well, I'm going to assume that we're going to get no more questions. Again, thank you for your time. Thank you for being a customer. Until the next time, have a great day.